Europeans tried to make inroads into Africa for centuries. Alexander the Great only managed to conquer a small portion of Nubia, while the Romans were able to bring parts of North Africa into their empire. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to establish a presence in southern Africa during the late 1400s, but their outposts were generally restricted to trading posts focused on negotiation and diplomacy. However, during the 1880s, that all changed. The colonial powers began what would become known as the Scramble for Africa. Before the Age of Discovery, Europe had developed a taste for goods from the Middle and Far East. In 1380, the Venetians won the dominance of Asian trade, which came in via the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. The other European countries resented Venetian control of this valuable trade and began to try and seek alternative sea routes that would allow them access. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 also played a large part in kickstarting the Age of Discovery, as the Silk Road was closed to Europe after the Ottomans gained control of the city. The Portuguese soon found a reason to concentrate on the African peninsula as well as travel beyond it, and that reason was gold. They knew that gold came from Central Africa near the Niger, so when Portuguese Prince Henry the Navigator began financing voyages down the west coast of Africa, it was partly to find an inlet that would allow them access to the mines. During the 1480s, the Portuguese began to settle in the Kingdom of Congo along Africa's west coast, trading guns and materials for enslaved people. This relationship would pave the way for the transatlantic slave trade. By 1488, a Portuguese navigator called Bartolomeu Dias became the first European to sight the southern end of the South African Cape Peninsula while trying to chart a new route to the Indies. Other European countries also began setting up trade relationships with African communities, although they stuck to the coastal regions and used these as bases to allow trade with Asia. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company established a colony at Table Bay, which would later become Cape Town. The settlement's purpose was as a stopping point for Dutch traders traveling around the Cape en route to and from the Dutch East Indies, where they could resupply and take on fresh water and food. In order to be able to better supply the ships, in 1657 the Dutch began to assign land to settlers who could farm the land and raise livestock. In the late 1700s, France and Britain tried to capture the Cape Colony and gain control of the sea route to the east. In 1795, the British took over the Cape Colony, which ended the Dutch East India Company's dominance in the region. Although the colony was relinquished back to the Dutch in 1802, the British once again re-annexed it after the Napoleonic Wars in 1806. By the 1870s, despite the Europeans' desire to exploit the resources of Africa, only 10% of the African continent was under the control of European countries. Three main colonial powers managed to gain a foothold in some coastal regions of Africa. Britain controlled the Cape Colony, France established a hold in Algeria, and Portugal had Angola and Mozambique. While coastal Africa was highly accessible to European naval powers, traveling farther inland had proved difficult. Not only did they encounter hostile locals who were protecting their land, but the Europeans also succumbed to tropical diseases such as malaria. A lack of recognizable landmarks and resources often meant death from starvation or dehydration. However, the major European powers were well aware of the profits to be gained by exploiting the natural resources of other countries, and they coveted Africa's untapped riches, which included copper, gold, diamonds, rubber, and palm oil. Another factor that made Africa appealing was the end of the transatlantic slave trade and the loss of colonies in the Americas. The European powers saw Africa as a prime new ground for colonies from which to maintain their wealth and power. It was just a case of who would get there first. In 1876, Belgium's King Leopold II announced his intention to explore the Congo region, and in 1879 he sent British explorer Henry Morton Stanley to the area. Stanley had already made a name for himself when he found and rescued Dr. David Livingstone, who had gone missing while trying to find the source of the Nile. The same year that Stanley was commissioned to explore the Congo, the French began to build a railway east from Dakar and joined the British in taking financial control of Egypt. Also in 1879, the British became engaged in the Anglo-Zulu War. The British coveted Zululand because they desired slave labor to work in the South African diamond fields. Under King Cetshwayo, the Zulu were understandably unwilling to submit to British rule in South Africa. They assembled a force of around 50,000 well-disciplined fighters to keep the British at bay. In order to launch a large-scale attack on the Zulu kingdom, the British needed a reason. For this purpose, they issued an ultimatum to Quechua in December 1878. The British demanded that, amongst other things, the Zulu pay reparations for alleged insults against the British Empire and that they dismantled their military system within 30 days. The ultimatum was designed to be impossible to satisfy, meaning that the British could justify bringing in troops to invade Zululand. The initial stages of the war went to the Zulus' favor due to the unpreparedness of the British. The attack at Isandlwana further provoked the British government, which was not overly enthusiastic about a war, into a full-scale campaign. The British also preempted the second day's attack at Rorke's Drift, and after a firefight that lasted for nearly 12 hours, over 500 Zulu warriors were shot down. By August 1879, the Zulu nation was at the mercy of the British government. The Congo was a highly disputed area, and by the early 1880s, Stanley was trying to establish a mercantile enterprise that would later be known as the Congo Free State for the Belgians. At the same time, France had dispatched a naval officer, Pierre de Brazza, to the Congo Basin. In 1881, Brazza raised a French flag over what he dubbed Brazzaville, despite Portugal feeling it had the best claim to the Congo due to its trade and treaties with the Congo Empire. Meanwhile, France was moving to occupy Tunisia under the pretext of fighting piracy and Muslims. The French quickly solidified Brazza's claim in the Congo in 1881 and then took Guinea in 1884. Germany, which had planned to make forays into Africa, saw it had to make a move due to other European advancements. Britain felt that its trade route through Egypt was being threatened by France's move eastward through Africa. As tensions between the colonial powers rose, Portugal proposed a conference to discuss further attempts at colonial expansion into Africa. The meeting, dubbed the Berlin Conference, was held in Berlin and began on November 15, 1884. It consisted of a series of negotiations to discuss all questions connected to the Congo River Basin and Africa as a whole. The Berlin Conference could be said to be the formal version of the Scramble for Africa. 14 countries were represented at the conference: Austria-Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Norway, Turkey, and the United States. The noticeable lack of any representation from Africa was due to the fact that the colonial powers saw no value in their input, as the inherently racist imperialist systems dismissed African cultures as inferior and primitive. The conference was held at the behest of Portugal, which wanted to ratify its claim of the Congo estuary. Still, it was the chancellor of the newly formed German Empire, Otto von Bismarck, who invited all the major Western powers to negotiate questions in the hopes that it would end the rivalry and confusion about the future colonial control of Africa. Bismarck also hoped that if he could get his rivals to struggle with one another over territory, he would be able to expand Germany's influence in Africa. The resulting conference essentially carved up Africa without any consideration for those who actually lived there. When the conference began, 80% of Africa was under local and traditional control, with over 1,000 indigenous cultures and regions. During the meeting, the Western colonial powers drew up new irregular geometric borders that divided Africa into 50 new countries. The new boundaries paid no attention to the established politics or linguistic borders of the Africans, and groups of people were divided by new borders. In contrast, unrelated or warring groups were merged. The Portuguese claim to the Congo was dismissed, and the conference declared that the Congo and the Niger rivers would be considered neutral and open to trade from all parties. At the end of the 3-month-long conference, which lasted until February 26, 1885, the major colonial countries had staked their claim in Africa. Great Britain was given control of Egypt, Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Nigeria, and Ghana. France took the majority of Western Africa, controlling territories from Mauritania to Chad, as well as Gabon and the Republic of Congo. The Congo Free State became the personal possession of King Leopold II. Portugal kept Angola and Mozambique. Italy got Somalia and part of Ethiopia. Germany was assigned Namibia and Tanzania, while Spain had the smallest territory, Equatorial Guinea. After the conference, the European countries simply went in and took what they decided was theirs. Although the African nations fought hard to defend their homes, thousands of Africans were killed in the resulting wars, which were distinctly one-sided, as the Europeans had developed more effective weapons due to industrial advancements. Life under the colonial powers was oppressive and brutal. and the colonizers justified their harsh authoritarian rule with racist and discriminatory beliefs. In February 1885, King Leopold II established his hold of the Congo Free State. He brutally seized the region and, unlike the other colonizing powers, took the Congo into his private possession rather than establish a colony. The event was disastrous for the local population and led to many violations of human rights. King Leopold borrowed money from the Belgian government under the guise of bringing civilization to the Congo. However, in reality, his brutal regime forced the people of the Congo to labor for natural resources in the area, including rubber and ivory, for the personal enrichment of Leopold. According to estimates, around half of the Congolese population died from malnutrition and abuse. Disease and torture were rife, with many being brutally penalized by having their hands or feet amputated as a form of punishment. As stories of Leopold's blatant human rights violations began to leak out, many Europeans demanded an end to the abuses of Leopold's regime. In 1908, international pressure forced Leopold to hand the Congo Free State over to Belgium, and it was renamed the Belgian Congo. By 1914, 90% of Africa was controlled by European countries. So how did Europe colonize Africa? Well, to put it simply, they just took it. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about the colonization of Africa, check out our book, Scramble for Africa, a captivating guide to imperial rivalries, heroic battles, and the unfolding legacy of the continent, including the Zulu War. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.